Just 7 years ago, robots were being lowered into a pond so contaminated that no person could work anywhere near it. Today, that pond is still there, and so is most of the mess around it. Welcome to Sellafield, the nuclear site now at the centre of what's officially forecast to be Britain's £136 billion nuclear cleanup. A project that isn't expected to finish for another 100 years. So, how did a single site rack up a cleanup, cost bigger than the GDP of most countries, and why will it still be a construction zone when today's toddlers are retired? To get a clearer picture, we're diving into the history, the mistakes, and the almost unbelievable timeline ahead for one of the UK's most complicated megaprojects. Sellafield sits on the Cumbrian coast in northwest England, and its story starts with ambition. In the 1940s, the site was chosen to produce plutonium for Britain's early nuclear weapons program, under the original name Windscale. By the 1950s, it had expanded into Calder Hall, the world's first commercial-scale nuclear power station, opened by the Queen in 1956. For a country rebuilding after the war, this was proof that Britain could lead the world into the atomic age. But ambition moved faster than caution. In October 1957, one of the site's plutonium production reactors caught fire, releasing radioactive material across the surrounding countryside in what's still considered the worst nuclear accident in British history. The fire was extinguished and the reactor sealed, remaining too contaminated to fully dismantle for decades. It's tempting to call that the moment everything went wrong, but Sellafield's real liability is bigger. 70 years of weapons production, power generation, and fuel reprocessing, all of which left behind waste nobody had a firm plan for. If you've enjoyed the video so far, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, because the story only gets messier from here. Over the following decades, Sellafield grew into a sprawling reprocessing complex, taking in spent nuclear fuel from power stations across Britain and, at times, from abroad. Reprocessing extracted reusable material from used fuel, but it also generated enormous volumes of radioactive waste, much of it stored in facilities never designed with long-term safety, let alone demolition in mind. Ponds and silos built in the 1950s and 60s were meant to hold waste for a few years. Instead, some of that material has sat in aging storage for over 60 years. 4 of these legacy ponds and silos are now considered the site's highest hazards. One, the Magnox Swarf storage silo, has been slowly leaking contaminated water into the ground since 2018, at a rate the Public Accounts Committee says would fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool roughly every 3 years. Officials insist the leak is contained and poses no risk to the public, but it's still running with no fixed end date. Another, the first-generation Magnox storage pond, became so overgrown and opaque that workers nicknamed it Dirty 30. Unable for years to even see what was sitting at the bottom. By the early 2000s, it was obvious this couldn't continue. In 2005, the UK government created the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, tasked with cleaning up Britain's civil nuclear legacy, with Sellafield as its largest and most expensive responsibility. The mission sounded straightforward. Empty the ponds and silos, demolish the old buildings, return the site to something safer. In practice, it's become one of the most technically difficult engineering challenges in the world. Large parts of the site are simply too hazardous for anyone to enter, so remote-operated cranes and grabbers do the work instead. New buildings have had to be built just to receive and repackage the old waste before it can move into safer storage. And because so much of the original material was poorly recorded, retrieval teams keep running into aging infrastructure that behaves unpredictably, from corroded containment to cranes that won't operate properly once installed. Costs, unsurprisingly, ballooned, and the numbers show exactly how much. In March 2019, the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority estimated the lifetime cost of decommissioning Sellafield. By 2025, that figure had risen by £21.4 billion. In 2023 to 24 prices, an increase of nearly 19% in 6 years, bringing the official undiscounted estimate to roughly £136 billion. To be precise, that's the lifetime cleanup forecast in today's prices, not a one-off bill for a single accident. Sellafield alone accounts for about two-thirds of the authority's entire £199 billion nuclear provision. And under a worst-case scenario modelled by the National Audit Office, the true cost could run as high as £253 billion. And the timeline is just as staggering as the price tag. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority's own projections put full site remediation at 2125. Nearly 70 years after the Windscale fire, the cleanup still has roughly another century to run. Workers who join the project today may retire before the job is finished, and so may their children. Public and political frustration has grown alongside the cost, and it's specific and documented. In June 2025, the Public Accounts Committee published a scathing report on Sellafield, warning that waste retrieval from aging buildings was too slow, significant hazards remained unaddressed, and deteriorating assets were making parts of the site increasingly unsafe. The committee said Sellafield had continued to rack up cost overruns and delays despite years of promises to improve. MPs also flagged a suboptimal reporting culture after receiving whistleblower letters, noting the authority paid over £377,000 settling employment claims in a single year, while Sellafield Limited signed 16 non-disclosure agreements in 3 years. The scale of the delivery problem shows up clearly in the numbers. 4 of Sellafield's major projects that Watchdogs first examined back in 2018 are now collectively forecast to cost around £1.15 billion more than planned, and to arrive somewhere between 58 and 129 months later than originally promised. One of the clearest case studies is the Replacement Analytical Project, meant to replace a laboratory on site that's now over 70 years old and, according to the National Audit Office, no longer capable of the analysis needed to support Sellafield's plutonium storage plans. Its outline business case was approved in January 2020 at a forecast cost of around £680 million, with a target completion date of January 2028. By the time Sellafield strategically paused the project in February 2024, the forecast had climbed to roughly £1.5 billion. With full delivery pushed back to December 2034, and the site had already incurred around £265 million on work that was never finished. Of that, the Public Accounts Committee concluded that roughly £127 million had effectively been wasted on a project a parliamentary report said had been managed very poorly indeed. Yet, unlike a stadium or a shopping centre, Sellafield isn't optional. It directly employed more than 11,500 people as of March 2024, making it one of Cumbria's largest employers and a genuine economic anchor for the region. Local supply chains have grown up around the site over 70 years. A sudden shutdown was never realistic, and a slow, extraordinarily expensive cleanup is really the only viable path forward. There's also a broader safety argument that's hard to dismiss. Every year those legacy ponds and silos remain unaddressed is another year of risk. Corroding infrastructure, aging seals, material sitting in conditions nobody would design today. From that angle, the ballooning budget isn't simply waste, it's the cost of diffusing a hazard the country inherited rather than chose. Officials have stressed that emptying the oldest, most dangerous facilities first, rather than finishing the entire site, is the true near-term priority. Progress, slow as it looks from the outside, has actually been real. Sellafield is now removing waste from all 4 of its highest hazard legacy ponds and silos simultaneously for the first time in the program's history, including hitting its 2024-25 target at the pile fuel cladding silo. Several of the oldest buildings on site have finally been demolished after being deemed too contaminated to touch for decades. Each win buys down risk, even if the finish line keeps moving further into the future. What Sellafield really represents is the flip side of a nuclear ambition that seemed limitless in the 1950s. Britain built fast, built proud, and built for a world that assumed someone else, some future generation, would eventually deal with the consequences. That future generation turned out to be almost everyone alive today, and likely their grandchildren too. The £136 billion price tag isn't really the cost of cleaning up one disaster. It's the cost of a century-old bet on progress that nobody thought all the way through to the ending.